Well, hello again to two sides to every question. Today's question is: was Marie Antoinette a victim? Wow, what an interesting history she had. Marie Antoinette, just to recap, most of you probably know all of this, but for those who don't, she was a Habsburg princess, born in Austria to the Holy Roman Emperor and his wife Maria Theresa. She was the 15th child, and as was the usual drill, she had her husband selected for her. Oh dear. And it was her bad luck to be assigned to the Dauphin, the equivalent of the Prince of Wales in France, soon to be King Louis XVI, to whom she was married at age 14. And 5 years later, he became the king, Louis XVI, when she was 19 years old, and lived a life of certainly what we would call extravagance, which is where some of the controversy arises from. And but nonetheless, she endured the French Revolution and her arrest, her seeing her husband die by the guillotine, was tried and convicted for treason, and herself executed in 1793. So that's the story of Marie Antoinette, and one can reasonably ask, was she a victim? Well, that certainly was an act of life, and some feel that what happened to her wasn't her fault, that she was just a victim of the system, and others feel, well, I'm sorry, she's got a lot of blame herself. She has only herself to blame, so let's look at the arguments on both sides. Let's look at the yes people who say, yes, she was indeed a victim. Well, to begin with, I guess the most obvious point about being a victim is that history decided that she was going to be the Queen of France at the time of the French Revolution. That was just plain bad luck, so she was a victim of her fate. And of course, when the revolution took place and the terror proceeded and the executions began and so forth, she herself was a victim of that. Number two, you can actually say that by having been married off to the French royal family, she was a victim of an earlier king, Louis XIV. And Louis XIV's policy was to draw all the nobles in to himself, to bring them into Versailles, to bring them into court, and not on their respective lands. His notion there was good idea to keep your enemies close so you can keep an eye on them. Well, at the same time, by virtue of that, they didn't pay any attention to what was going on in their estates, and the disaster that befell the estates, the taxation, the eventual starvation, and so forth, itself was probably the single biggest contributor to the revolution. So she was unlucky enough not only to marry into a family that was the victim of the revolution, but one that had long since been behaving in such a way that the revolution was inevitable. Number three, she of course was simply a victim of the policy on the part of many monarchs, exists to some extent today, of having as many children as possible and placing them around in different countries so as to forge some kind of connection or alliance or whatever with other countries. His mother, Maria Theresa, the Empress, Holy Roman Empress, and the Habsburg Empress, was doing just that, and so she simply got her marching orders. She had nothing to say about it, and In that sense, she was a victim of a system, of a process that has some kind of unpleasant overtones to it. Next, she was born into a system that inculcates entitlement and even extravagance. Where have we seen that before? And so, to a certain extent, her behavior, which we now look back upon with, some condemnation and so forth, with her excesses, that was just all part of the system. And in a way, she was victimized by the rules under which she was forced to live. She was also unlucky enough to marry a dunce. Louis XVI just didn't seem to have much upstairs, and as a consequence, he misread the runes all along the way. There were many times when he could have said, well, I see what's going on in the country. I want to make some changes. I want to respond to these pressures. But as many have done before it, he chose to stand fast and ignore it, much like the Tsar did at the time of the Russian Revolution. Well, all this will blow over. It'll all be okay, and I'll be fine. Well, he was the kind of man who not only didn't seem to have the capacity to understand what's going on, but didn't even have the inclination to take any strong steps. Well, so there you have someone who ultimately died because of all of these pressures that were on her, and died a nasty and humiliating death. So I think we can pretty well argue that Marie Antoinette was a victim. Okay, well, what about those who say, no, she's got a lot to answer for herself. She wasn't really a victim, or she wasn't totally a victim. So first of all, we have to deal with her extravagance. Her business about pretending to be a shepherdess at the Petit Trianon, a woman who'd probably never seen a shepherd in her life. The whole thing had a kind of an unreal, kind of bizarre detachment from reality, and one, of course, that she nurtured with her friends. They say with perfumed sheep. I don't know if that's true, but it was a crazy kind of business, and she was self-indulgent to the extreme. In fact, so much so that her mother, the formidable Maria Theresa, was appalled. Sent her repeated letters warning her, telling her to mend her ways, to which she obviously paid little attention. So it wasn't without comment, her behavior, and certainly from her mother, and so she has to take some responsibility for proceeding accordingly. Next, in the famous flight from Paris, when the coach containing the royal family was apprehended at Varennes on their way out of the country, there's some question about this, but it's likely that she had some part in not leaving modestly. It was a large coach filled with all kinds of riches and clothing and a lot of things that she didn't really need but insisted on having, which is, of course, what called attention to their traverse through this town, led to their capture and being sent back to Paris, and ultimately to their death. So she's got to answer for that a bit. Wasn't really a victim, although to a certain extent she has to share the blame with her husband. She also had a warning from her brother. Her brother, by then I think himself Holy Roman Emperor, came to visit, having been dispatched by Maria Theresa to find out why she wasn't having any children, and also to comment on her excessive behavior. Well, apparently the the brother helped out on the first one by giving her some love tips. But in particular is said to have been appalled by what he saw going on in the countryside and warned her that she should respond more to what was going on with the peasantry in his country and how that would eventually lead to trouble. So we can't say once again that she wasn't warned. She was warned about her behavior by her mother, but also by an assessment of the French economic and political scene by her brother. I guess she chose simply to ignore that. One could say that as a woman, nobody would have paid any attention to her anyway, but I'm not so sure. It just seems like, she didn't care. And finally, she had a very close relationship with a Swedish nobleman named Fersen, who apparently was very much in love with her. Whether or not they consummated that love or anything of that sort is unclear and probably will never be known, but one can suspect there might have been something going on there. And in many respects, that's a pretty dumb thing to do when you're in the job she was in and in the kind of atmosphere that doesn't take those sorts of things kindly. So she's got to take a little bit of responsibility for all of that. Well, gosh, there's some pretty strong condemnatory points there that say that she wasn't entirely a victim. She had to blame herself. What's my take on this? Well, I just feel sorry for her. I think she was probably a decent person. She was the victim of a system and a victim of very bad historic luck. In particular, not only being the Queen of France in the build-up to the French Revolution, but also at the time of the Enlightenment, which was, if anything, very much at work in France, when behavior of the sort she and her husband were indulging in was being very much questioned, not only by philosophers like Rousseau, but by playwrights, philosophers, commentators of one sort or another. The winds of change were beginning to blow, and the fact that she didn't respond at all to them doesn't speak very well for her, but in many respects it was just hard luck for her to have been born at that time. She probably was not malevolent. She either missed it or didn't care. Oh dear, what a sad story. Okay, well, that's my take on Marie Antoinette. I don't imagine I've upset too many people with that one. So if you liked it, give me a like, the usual. Please subscribe and comment, make any suggestions for further videos, give a notification, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye-bye.